always amazing to me that I lived through all these.
What you see here is part of a national phenomenon, a phenomenon that had to happen when the TV set married the computer.
There was such a change that happened.
What is the long-term value of preserving the history of video games?
It's all a reflection of what our technical capabilities are and how our storytelling abilities have evolved.
How important of a figure do you think Nolan Bushnell, the founder of ATARI and the creator of PONG, is in the landscape of the video game industry?
Well, you can't say that Nolan Bushnell is the inventor of the video game, but you can say by all means that Nolan Bushnell is the inventor of the video game industry.
This is PONG. This is the granddaddy of all video games. This is the video arcade game that got the video game industry going.
It's like art, but it communicates with you, and you can communicate with it. Isn't that kind of neat?
I want to set the record straight. What was the first ever video game?
The first video game I consider is...
I sat down with the video game historian, William Hunter. William is an avid gamer who has experienced the birth of the video game industry in real time. Seeing this as a unique and privileged position, he decided to dedicate a part of his life into documenting the history of video games. To say that he's a walking encyclopedia of all things video games is to say nothing. He runs a very interesting website called the DotEaters, where he meticulously documents every single historical detail of video games, basically from their birth. We talk about the person who created the video game industry, the first ever video game, the first ever cartridge, the first ever console. It is a wonderful conversation. If you're at all interested in the video game industry and you're interested in how games were made and why they were made, this is the perfect episode for you. And with that said, let's uncover William's story. William, thank you so very much for finding the time to come on the podcast. I'm extremely excited to talk to you, to a video game historian, and as somebody who is fascinated by video games and loves video games, I'm really interested to talk to you and get a bit of the insight about the industry. Every gamer has their unique story of how they got into video games. You briefly mentioned your story on your website. And it's quite an interesting and heartwarming story, to be honest with you. Could you expand on that story just a little bit and tell us how exactly you actually got into video games in the first place?
Right. Well, thanks so much for having me on your show. It's great to talk to you. And to give you sort of a brief outline of how my story sort of went with video games is I remember the first video game I played was... we were on vacation, probably in Florida, I think. And my sister and I, in the lobby of the hotel we were staying at, we saw this PONG game.
Right.
If everybody remembers PONG. PONG was pretty much the first, it wasn't definitely not the first video game. It came out in 1972, but it was the first game that was really super popular that sort of made video games get into the consciousness of the public, right? And everybody at the time was playing Pong, and we sat down at the cocktail tables, they're called, these little tables where you sit down and we're playing Pong. And I think that's the first time I ever actually really played a video game. And then my dad brought home a Pong machine for home when it came out for the home in 1975, and we just played that. And then it goes not to get too much into each system, but we got an Atari 2600 for Christmas. I still remember at the time you'd get the Christmas catalog. For us, it's the Sears Christmas catalog, and we'd go through all the toys. And by the time we were finished, it was in rags because me and my sister would be reading through it, looking at all the toys. And I remember riding home in the back of the car with my mom, and I was looking in the catalog, and the Atari. At the time it was called the Atari VCS, later changed to the Atari 2600. And I was looking at this, and I took a chance, and I'm like, Mom, is it possible we could get this for Christmas? And to my surprise, she said, maybe. And I was expecting no way are we getting that. But I was like, maybe, wow, that's amazing. And so they went out, and it was the hottest thing that Christmas. So they had to look all around. And I think they eventually had to drive to Buffalo and
Oh man.
get this console. And it was like, $400 in like 78 or $79. And so super expensive.
Right.
But so we had the Atari, and then what I did was eventually I sold the Atari at a big loss, and we bought a ColecoVision. And the ColecoVision was an astounding console. I can't undersell the ColecoVision enough because the graphics were so amazing. Now it's funny when you look at it now, of course, right? All this is in the comparison, of the time, not of what we have now, but
Of course, yeah.
it was an amazing console with great graphics. It came packed with Donkey Kong, and you had never seen a game at home that looked so much like the arcade version of it. Even though when you look at it, there's big differences, right?
Right.
But still, at the time, it was like, this is amazing. This is like playing it playing the arcade game at home. And then the ColecoVision I sold, and I got a Commodore 64. And I was a gamer on the computer for 30 years, for whatever length it was. And then finally in 2000 or whenever it came out, probably even later than that, we got the Wii. That
Got
was
it.
the first
Right.
console I had bought in years and decades, right? And then I got a PlayStation, and I've played PlayStation games ever since. That's my modern console: PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and now we have a PlayStation 5. That's sort of my trajectory through the landscape of video games.
Awesome, man. It's so wonderful that your mother actually supported you on that day. So actually, your father was, a bit of a, I wouldn't say a gamer, but he enjoyed, the
You
arcades,
know,
right? Back in the
he
day.
wasn't a gamer at all. I don't
Okay.
know why he brought that console home, why he brought Pong home. I never asked him, and
Hmm.
but it's amazing that he did. But no, I don't think he had ever been a video gamer.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. That's a great story. Are you at all, do you regret at all selling these consoles today?
Well, I've since picked them all up again.
Okay.
So I have an Atari, I have a ColecoVision, I have an Intellivision, which is a console I never had, but I was super fascinated with the Intellivision because before the ColecoVision came out, the Intellivision was the graphics powerhouse video game console at the time. So I remember we'd go to the department store, and they always had the Intellivision set up, and they'd be playing Major League Baseball. And it was by far the most realistic sports game you ever saw. It's like it had the diamond, it had the little figures running around. You could throw to the outfield and pass the ball around and control each figure uh, individually, and then it actually talked a little bit when you were pitching the ball to the batter. If the pitcher got him out, the console would say, "You're out," like just like that, right? It actually said
Awesome.
something. A voice had a voice in it, and I was like, that was amazing. But I remember being fascinated by that, but we never bought it. But I have it now. I have the ColecoVision and the Intellivision and the Odyssey 2, which is another console at the time. So I picked them all up since then.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I do know that you're a collector, and we're going to get into that, and we're also going to
Hmm.
get into the story of Pong for sure because it is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that a part of me wishes that I could be around, at that time because that was the precipice of console games,
Yeah.
and to see kind of the war of console games unfold in real time, and then to look back at that day today. Must have been a very interesting and a wild time, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's an amazing to me. It's amazing that one of the reasons why I created my website that's just covering the history of video games. It's always amazing to me that I lived through all these. It's kind of like a
Right,
person that you know y- you lived through like when the invention of the telephone, right? It's
right.
like there was such a change that happened, and that
Yeah,
I went through. It's just amazing to me that this all happened within my lifetime.
absolutely. No, for sure. The only thing I can relate to that is the release of the iPhone, probably. That was
Yeah,
the big thing that,
exactly.
yeah, you
That's
could compare it to
exactly
that,
right.
right? That changed the world. And oh
Yeah,
man,
yeah,
it's truly wonderful. So just to speak to your website and to what you do. So obviously you are a video game historian. But can you share the specific moment that ignited your interest in exploring and documenting the history of video games and exactly starting the DotEaters website.
Yeah, for sure. So back in like late 90s, so I first brought my site online in 1998. And the reason why I did was at the time, retro video game emulators got really popular. And the one that was the most popular was MAME, the multiple arcade machine emulator. And when I first downloaded it, it did hundreds of classic video games, and now it does thousands and thousands and
Oh
thousands of them.
wow.
They've added more and more every time they update it. But I was playing all these games on MAME, all these great classic arcade games, and also at the time, PBS came out with a documentary that was called "Triumph of the Nerds." It was written and produced, I guess, by Robert X. Cringely. He's like a tech reporter, and he did this great story of how personal computers came to be, and that in itself is a fascinating story. Um, and so in my head, I kind of combine the two together. I'm like, I'm playing all these great classic video games, but I like to know more about their history and how they came to be developed. And when I looked around at the time, there was a couple of websites that were sort of covering that material, but not in sort of the real comprehensive way I was wanting. So I just thought I'll just do it myself. So I started researching all these games and reaching out to as many people as I could who were the people responsible for them, and then researching like interviews they had done, and just sort of started creating this website that talked about it.
Wow, well, that's really awesome, and I got to tell you, from behalf of the gaming community, and at least from from me, thank you, because it truly is a fascinating website, and it's like a rabbit hole, right? I couldn't
Yeah,
get enough. I was
yeah,
preparing myself for the interview, and I had to stop myself at some point because, you could just go on and on and on, and then they're very deep, and the stories and the way it's written is also very interesting, and it's engaging. If you like video games and you go on your website, it's a very entertaining time that you're gonna spend looking at all sorts of information that's out there. And sort of speaking to what you just mentioned, and the way you research stuff, your articles, they explore various aspects of the video game industry, from iconic games to influential game designers. So could you just dive into how exactly do you research and curate the content for your articles? Like, what exactly do you do, and what's the method there? Because I assume doing it back then was different than doing it today.
yeah. It's funny that when I started, like, there was no Google,
Right.
but there were search engines, right? I remember the search engine I always used the most as a starting point was Alta Vista, and no one will know what that is. But it was at the time, it was the search engine that had crawled the internet the most. It had the most pages, right? Google came up with this neat thing where it's not just the breadth of pages, but how each page, whatever they link to, like they kind of established the relevance and importance of a website through these algorithms, right? Alta Vista was just a brute force. They're covering every single web page, and if you search for something, you got some great hits, and then you got a ton of crap that didn't have anything to do with anything, right? But so I would sort of start off just a very basic kind of research of whatever it was, whatever game, whatever person I was looking at, and then it's just crawling through magazine articles, newspaper articles. Even at the time, there was lots of stuff online about these people, and then, like I said, if it was possible, I try to reach out to the people that were involved, and it's always been my great surprise through this whole process is that whenever you reach out to somebody and you ask them for an interview, generally they'll say yes, and it's always surprising to me. It's like, well, that's cool.
It's
You want to
wonderful.
talk to me? So it's just a combination of all those things. It's just brute research, and then reaching out after you've researched and you have some questions, you have parts of it, of the history. When you look at it, there's some holes there that you're just interested in a different part of it, and then you try to fill in those pieces with information from the actual people, or just through magazine articles or whatever.
That's really wonderful. And I think the most as you said, the most interesting and the best part of it was actually reaching out to these people. And I assume, it must have been very exciting and, informative for you to actually speak to them. But, you mentioned, holes in stories, and that's what I want to get into a little bit, and sort of like the challenges that you faced while researching all your information. Um, were there any moments where, certain stories contradicted each other, and how exactly did you, find, quote unquote, the truth in certain scenarios?
Well, I always try my best. I always try to get a few different uh, viewpoints in a certain thing, right? It's really interesting. You can actually talk to the people and they will tell you this is how I remember it happening, and then you talk to other people, kind of associates or people who are doing it some other part of what you're looking at, and then the story is different. So it's kind of weird, and it's
Oh
sort of
my.
it's hard to sort of figure out, but just by putting all the pieces and looking at like a jigsaw puzzle, if the pieces fit and like you have multiple confirmations about this is kind of the as close to the truth as you're going to get, then I'll go ahead and use that. But I always try to have multiple sources and different perspectives, and then some of it is me figuring that out myself, and
Wow.
some of it falls into place, and it's like obviously this is what has happened, right? And even having done all that, every once in a while someone will reach out of the blue and say, this is not correct. It's, you have an
Really?
issue here. And I really appreciate that. Some people might get pissed off. What are you talking about? And there's a defense, you feel
Yeah.
defensive, but I never do. I'm like, thank you so much, because all it's helping me do is making the site better, making it more accurate, telling a more accurate and complete story. And I love that. I love it when people write in and give me, correct me on something. I really appreciate that.
From the people that you have reached out to, who was perhaps the most interesting, or, the most, let's say, influential person to
Right.
whom you spoke?
Well, I have to say, without a doubt, it was Trip Hawkins, who
Right.
was the founder of Electronic Arts, right? And I was, I have to admit that, some parts of the site I don't have a firsthand knowledge of. Like, I'll say it this way: some of it, this is not a great way of saying it, but it's like some of it I'm more interested in than other parts.
Right.
Now that
Of course.
the sound of it sounds like I'm negligent with some parts. Am I ignoring some parts? No, but some parts I just feel more passionate about because those are the types of games I played. And
Exactly.
one of the examples of that is Electronic Arts, and Electronic Arts itself is a really fascinating story when you look at
Yeah.
the whole history of the company, because it started out, Electronic Arts, founded by Trip Hawkins, and he's started out wanting to push computer games at the time, push computer games further, right, to become something else. At the time when EA started, they were making computer games, but they were sort of like sold in Ziploc bags, and it's just a one programmer who like is working by himself and he's trying to sell the game. But
Right.
what Electronic Arts sort of became was this label that attracted all these great game developers. So like John Freeman and Ann Westfall, the guys that started Freefall, and Dan Bunton, who did some amazing work with multiplayer games at the time when multiplayer games, no one had heard of them, right? Like you don't play games online. You just sit at a computer by yourself and you just play the game by yourself. He
Right.
introduced, at the time he was he actually did a transition to
Okay.
become Daniel Buntonberry. I'll just use the pronoun that at the time when he made those games, that's what he
Of
was.
course.
He was a man, so I'll just use he. He like introduced all multiplayer gaming, which was astounding. And then there's Dan Bunton, who did pinball construction set. That's what it's called. And so Electronic Arts did the most amazing computer games at the time, right? And that's what Trip Hawkins was trying to do. He was trying to push the field of computer gaming forward. And unfortunately, when you look at the whole history of Electronic Arts, I have to say now that it's moved away from that 100%, because all really Electronic Arts became was like it was like, I always forget, Call of Duty is Activision, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so they're the other ones. they
Yeah.
they they do like Battlefield, EA's Battlefield and all that. So they just became kind of a company that no longer was this sort of incubator for creativeness, and they just sort of fall onto the same
Yeah.
material, the same kind of games they did over and over again. It's just like EA Sports. It's just every NHL hockey game is just a slight iteration from the next one, right? It's like
There's that issue.
they're not pushing the envelope anymore like they used to, and it's unfortunate because they started totally doing that, but they lost their way along the way, and EA is now sort of a shell of what it used to be. But at the time, when every time they came out with a computer game, I would buy it, and it would just be an amazing game.
Well, let's hope that it's a cycle. Let's hope that perhaps in the near future, the spirit of innovation perhaps goes back into EA, and perhaps we could see them innovate, or at least come close to innovating as they did back in the day. But it's
Right,
so
right.
wonderful to know that you've actually contacted Kit. That's fascinating.
Yeah,
How?
he was get back to what your original question
Yeah.
was. He gave so much information, like I couldn't believe it. He
Oh
sat down,
my.
he was like, we corresponded through email, and like he just kept giving me more and more information and giving me contacts about people I could talk to. And he was super helpful. This guy that is like one of the big movers and shakers in computer games.
Oh, it's so
He
wonderful.
gave me so much of his time and gave me so much information, huge emails full of information. It was amazing.
If I may ask, how long ago was this?
Oh boy.
A while back.
Probably like, around the early 2000s or something like
Okay,
that.
that's not
Yeah.
too long. That's not too long.
Yeah.
Wow. Because I believe he's in his early 70s, perhaps
Yeah, yeah,
now.
he's yeah,
Yeah.
he's still
Wow.
around, still.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, Trip Hawkins. He'll do seminars and speeches and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think. I mean, just having the opportunity to speak to him back then, I think was a bit more, perhaps, interesting than now, maybe, because back then his mind and his interests were a little bit different. So all
Yeah,
the memories were right there and fresh. So wow,
yeah.
that's wonderful. That's really interesting to know, honestly speaking. And speaking about sort of interesting part of your journey and of what you do, is there a particular era or a particular aspect of the gaming industry or the gaming history, sorry, that you find the most captivating?
Well, I have to say, sort of in a general sense, what really keeps me going, looking at this kind of material, is what really fascinates me the most is this chasm between what was a video game and what we consider a video game now, right? And while there's this huge chasm of in the visual quality of video games, what sort of hasn't changed is this, what the most important part of a video game is, where it's like the gameplay and the feel of it, and
Right.
like the world it kind of creates. And to me, like, just from what we started with and what we have now, it's so different and so the same, right?
Right.
In the principles of video game design, the principles haven't really changed, but we've gone from 1,000 lines of code to billions of lines of code, right? And it's amazing how much complex things have gotten, but in a way, the fundamentals haven't really changed.
Yeah, it really is wonderful, and I like what you said. It's not the same, but yet it is the same.
Yeah,
And yeah, and I can agree with that, because probably the earliest console and games that I've played were on the N64,
right,
and just seeing that difference
right,
is a
right.
big deal.
Yeah,
But
well,
the
there's a funny
feeling,
story. Like I
yeah,
remember one day I went into a Blockbuster. Again, this shit is showing how much things have changed. What the
yeah,
f is a Blockbuster? Like, what is that? Well, that's where you got your videotapes from. Videotapes? What the hell is that? Like, it's amazing how much things have changed. But
right,
anyway, So I remember going into a Blockbuster and they had an N64 on display and they were playing Mario 64, right? And I remember just looking at it and I was astounded by what I was seeing, right? The graphics were so amazing. There's a whole 3D world and you took Mario and it's like all I ever knew about Mario was you play Donkey or play, say, Super Mario Brothers. You're a little flat Mario and you're just running along the side and you're jumping. And an N64, it opens up this whole 3D world. And I can't understate how amazing, just me standing at that Blockbuster, I was amazed by what I was seeing. 3D characters and worlds brought to life. I'm like, this is amazing.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. Really, I can understand because seeing the difference that I know from the N64 to now, I can kind of jump into your head and imagine what a vast difference it must have been seeing from 2D to 3D.
Yeah.
Because I spoken to my dad and to my uncle. They played video games. They were not crazy gamers, but they played, and they
Yep.
say the same thing as you. They say as soon as we could look around the whole world in 3D, it
Yeah.
baffled us, and we could not believe that this is the next level of video games. So I
Yeah.
can only imagine how absolutely incredible that must
Yeah.
have been.
Another sort of more modern example is GTA.
Right,
A
of
game
course.
I've always loved to play, right? And I played that initial GTA where it's top down, you have your cars, you're just driving down this top down world. It's still kind of a sort of a pseudo 3D world that they're making, but it's really just you're looking straight down. And then when they came out with GTA 3, and it was this whole modeled 3D city, right? Liberty City, and you're running around and you're causing all kinds of mayhem. You react to the city and the city reacts back to you. It was amazing. It was
Absolutely.
just so amazing. But the funny thing is, just playing that initial GTA and now playing, GTA 5 and GTA 6 is maybe in a year or two or whatever. Like the attitude that Rockstar at the time when they did the original 3DA, they weren't Rockstar. It was called DMA Design, but they're sort of the same, the same company. And their attitude hasn't changed. Just imagine that. Like it was playing the initial GTA and then playing, the most modern version of it. The attitude of the
Right.
game hasn't changed.
The
It's
DNA,
still
right?
like crazy balls to the wall,
Yeah.
just in your face violence and like giving you the opportunity, whatever you do. If you want to drive your car, pick up a hooker, have sex with her, beat her to death with a baseball bat and take her money, you can do that.
Go for it.
Now, you
Yeah.
couldn't do that in the initial GTA, of course, but that same attitude of just letting a player do what they want in the world, finish the missions or cause a lot of mayhem and then see the city react is the same thing, right?
I can really relate to that because I played GTA 3. I don't even know how long, and just to touch upon the fact that whether you should do the missions or not, because I was younger and I did not even touch the missions for I don't know how long. I was trying to figure out the city, figure out what to
Yeah.
do, enjoying just driving, finding the
Yeah.
cars, trying to figure out a way to jump onto the next island because I didn't
Right,
realize you have to pass the
right, 'cause
missions to
it's
get there.
locked off. Yeah,
It
exactly.
was so much fun. It was just me absolutely getting all lost in the world. And then, a few years later, perhaps, I finished the game, and that was another, let's say, whole adventure,
Yeah.
within itself. So it is absolutely wonderful. And I think what they did and what they're doing is crazy. And hopefully, sooner or later, whenever GTA 6 comes out, hopefully
Yeah.
that emotion's gonna come back.
Right.
No, those are wonderful stories, really, and I think we could talk for hours
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
all
That's
that.
the topic of video games. You have to be careful. Keep me on
Exactly.
track there, gotcha, because you can spin off so quickly. Just like you said, talking about the website, like even me, when I go in, I got to edit something. Like, I got to change something, or like I said, someone gave me some more information. So I got to go in there. I'll get in there. I'll start changing things, and all of a sudden, I've read the site for like 2 hours. It's like, oh, I got to stop.
That was me a couple days ago. William, given that video games have only been around for approximately 80 years, give or take,
Yeah, yeah.
which is a relatively, short span in the
Mhm.
grand
We're at
history.
like what, 250, 200 years of motion picture history,
Right.
something like that.
Right. So
Yeah.
in a way, we're still at the, the precipice of the whole thing. And in my mind, given, the rapid advancement of technology and, cultural and evolution as well, the significance of preserving this history cannot be overstated in my mind. And with
Hmm.
your expertise and, also with the collective efforts of your fellow historians, because there
Hmm.
also are other collectors and video
Yep,
game
yep.
historians out there. We have the opportunity to meticulously document the life cycle of the video game industry. And again, from the behalf of the community, I want to thank you for that, because it's a great
Mm.
opportunity to be able to dive into that. And my question is, in your view, what is the long-term value of preserving the history of video games?
Video games are like any media, like we're talking about the film industry, television industry, video game industry. It's all a reflection of what our technical capabilities are and how our storytelling abilities have evolved, right?
Right.
And both of those are interesting to follow on their own trajectory, and it's very interesting to put them together and just see how one influenced the other, right? So, and we just see how our mores have changed, and it's the human condition. It's another way of of expressing what it is to be human,
Right.
right? And it's a stylized super, like, I don't know about you, but I've never driven in a car and picked up a hooker and then beat her to with a baseball bat and taken her money.
I can't relate
But and I don't
as
know if
well.
it's not something I would pursue even in the game a lot, but it's something to try. Like you said, just it's something, some aspect of the game you want to bump up against and to see what the result is.
Right.
And so, but still, it's reflecting who we are as humans and how we tell a story. And it's, the video games are really interesting because they're interactive. It's not a passive thing where you're just having the media just wash over you, and then you don't, and then you just, there's no interaction with it. But with video games, you get in there and interact, and you yourself, what your actions and what your attitudes are will
Right.
reflect what's being shown in the game, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I could totally agree with that. And in a way, if I may just add my 2 cents, I treat video games as a work of art, as a collective work of art sometimes, and other times as a solo piece of art, would be done by a sole developer. But at the end of the day, it is a modern piece of art, and I respect it as such. And when I'm
Hmm.
playing the game, um, how can I put this? I try to appreciate what is made. So not
Yeah.
only do I, take, past the missions and, do what I have to do, but I kind of, stop and look, oh, wow, this, is there for a reason. This is here for a reason. What's the message that is trying to be conveyed? And I try to enjoy a game this way, where I look at it, from a perspective of, this is someone's creation, someone's, blood, sweat, and tears. And it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing. It takes
Hmm.
a long time, a lot of dedication, and not everybody can do it. And I think all those factors can relate to it being a work of art. I
Yeah.
cannot necessarily paint anything that Da Vinci does, or whatever. So if their work is considered art, I think video games could be considered as art as well.
Right.
So yeah, I fully agree with
Yeah,
what you're saying.
it's
And
interesting. One controversial thing, I have his quote up on my site. A controversial thing that Roger Ebert said about video games is, he said video games can never be art by the nature of them. They can never be art, and
interesting.
and it's a controversial statement, and so many people pointed out, like, to me, I'll use a modern version. Like, I don't know if you did you play Ghost of Tsushima?
Yeah, of course, of
It's
course.
an
It's a
amazingly
fantastic game.
visual, a beautiful lyrical visual world, right?
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
absolutely a piece of art, because it's just so beautiful. And then, like we were saying, like, well, it's a beautiful work of art and a great game with great mechanics, right?
Yeah,
So the combination of those two, just think of the two things about humans: what we build and the art we paint. And video
yeah.
games put them together,
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
right?
it's so beautifully said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can agree. Do you know why? I forgot the name of the person you mentioned. Do you know why he said this quote?
Um, I believe it's just because it's Roger Ebert, a very famous movie reviewer,
Okay.
and
Okay. Makes sense.
it's just more or less like he's passed away, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
He maybe longer than that, but he was just steeped in movies, right? And they just kind of didn't understand, like I said, you merge the things two together, but sometimes you focus on one thing or the other. And he's probably focusing on, you've got a joystick and you're just moving a character around, and like he doesn't understand that even that can be art, right? He's
Understood.
just
Understood.
he's all steeped in the language of film.
Just to continue here, I'm pretty interested to ask you this next question. Obviously today we see video games surge to unprecedented heights, surpassing the movie industry and the music industries in terms of revenue. And, also, I believe I can say in terms of cultural impact as well, slowly but surely. With this in mind, how important do you believe video games actually are? Or even how important was their ideation in the first place?
Yeah, I think it was David Crane was a really famous designer of games for. He was one of the founders of Activision. We talked about EA and sort of how it fell, fell from its original lofty heights, and Activision
Right.
is definitely another story, maybe for another time. But Activision was founded by David Crane and a few other people, Alan Miller, a whole bunch of them, like 5 or 6 people that were ex Atari programmers, and they were just sick and tired of not having their names on the games. And Atari treated them like serfs. They were just anonymous serfs, cranking out these games. And they felt like what you're saying is that they felt like they were making something really worthy and important and art, right? In the perspective of every other game that was coming out at the time, right? They were making some of the best stuff. So they left and founded Activision. But David Crane himself says, I have a quote from him again on my site. It's, the most important thing you can do with a computer is make a game, right? Right. Use it. Really, they're just game. A computer is just a game playing device. It's pretty much all he's saying. And so I feel that it's important to just express ourselves, right? And like I said,
Yeah.
since it's interactive, it's even more cathartic in
Right.
what the results we get when we're playing games, where we can input our own actions into it. We can pour more of ourselves into the game because we can affect what's going on in it, right? So I think
Right.
even like movies telling the human experience, video games do exactly the same thing, only even more on a more visceral level, right? On a more active level and a more proactive level. We can, what we do, you can see what the story that the developer was saying when he created it, but then he releases this thing into the wild and we all get our grubby little hands on it, and then we start making it do what we want it to do, right?
Right.
And that's an amazing thing. It's like art, but it communicates with you and you can
Yeah.
communicate with it. Isn't that kind of neat? It's like you can see a painting, you can see Van Gogh on the wall and appreciate the colors he chose and the lighting he chose to represent, and even just what the 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 character, the subject in the painting, you can sort of get an idea. But with video
Right.
games, they paint this picture and then we get in and we start moving the paint around, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we make our own painting from what we do. And I think that's super important and even more impactful than
Right.
regular media, right?
That's very beautifully said. I'm going to quote you on a couple of those
Right, for sure.
sentences there. That was really,
For
really good.
sure.
I can't agree with you more.
Right.
That's 100%. Continuing talking about the creation of video games, I want to talk exactly about that, and I believe it is safe for me to say that the mainstream media perhaps bends the story a little when it comes to the first ever video game.
Hmm.
And they bend it rightfully so, I believe.
Yeah.
But I want to set the record straight since I'm talking to you here.
Yeah.
So, what was the first ever
Yeah.
video game?
The problem is I don't have an answer for you either,
Okay.
because first of all, you're going back so far, like, but I can say I have an answer, but it never satisfies people, and like you
Hmm.
say, rightly so, because there are games before the example I'm going to give you, that people had made something approaching a video game. But on my site, what I refer to as the first video game, with all the different caveats that is involved with, the first
Absolutely. Yeah.
video game I consider is Tennis for Two, which is a game that a nuclear physicist made in
Yes.
1958, right? Named William Higginbotham. And the reason why I consider that the first video game is it had the appearance of something that became a video game later, right? It was sort of a very early version of Pong, right? It was like,
Right.
it was done on an oscilloscope. There was a line on the bottom, and then there was a little line going up as the net, and you just shot a ball back and forth, and it would bounce. It had
Yeah.
really amazing physics modeling for this 1958 video game on an analog computer, right?
Absolutely.
But it was like a
Absolutely.
tennis game. It took a sports metaphor and abstracted it as onto a screen that you played, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is a video game like I said, Pong wasn't the first video game, but it was the video game that invented the industry. Everybody
Got it. Yeah.
ran and started making Pong games. Atari and Nolan Bushnell were the inventors of Pong, but they only sold a fraction of the Pong games that were sold because everybody come rushing in. That's another thing you always see about video games after, is that something gets really popular and everybody else makes the same thing, right? And that's not just video games. You see movies where they come up with some topic, and then there's like 5 movies all that come up at the same time, all around that same topic, right?
Right.
But
Absolutely.
so Tennis for Two by William Higginbotham is what I consider the first video game, just because it looked like it's something recognizable as a video game,
Right.
right?
Is what we can recognize as a video game of today.
Yeah.
Correct. Am I correct in understanding that there's a slight connection between the J. Robert Oppenheimer and the creator of Tennis for Two, right?
There is. I saw Oppenheimer. I don't know if you saw it in the theater too, and I was kind of
Yeah, yeah, of course.
I was disappointed that they didn't. There wasn't a character named William Higginbotham there. I thought maybe they
Right.
maybe throw him in, but William Higginbotham actually developed the timing circuits for the atomic bomb. Essentially,
That
the
is
trigger for
absolutely
it.
crazy.
Yeah,
Right.
essentially the trigger for it. He was there that day with the Trinity test where they exploded the first nuclear bomb, and then he was
Yeah.
forever changed by that, and he founded the Society of Atomic Physicists, I think is the name of the organization. I might be getting that wrong, but it's pretty much a group of scientists that are trying to get us to keep in mind about what we've created, right? And the dangers of it, and how it can be spiraled out of control, right? And so he was forever impacted witnessing the biggest explosion that humans had ever seen, and he just sort of worked at regulating that for the rest of his life.
Right. Right. Now that is absolutely, such a crazy connection that,
Yeah.
the first thing, what we can call a video game, actually has some sort of a connection to the
Yeah.
creation of the atomic bomb.
Yeah. What else is funny
That's
too is
wonderful.
a neat connection is, so William Higginbotham, as well as being involved in the first atomic bomb, is he also was installed at MIT to create radar systems that they can mount in planes. They're reducing radar to a point where you can install it in a plane, and as the pilot's going, he can use the radar to see what's around him, right? And so he was involved in that. And what's funny is, what I would consider really the second video game created was Space War, which was developed at MIT by a group of people from the artificial intelligence lab and the computer labs and all that. Steve Russell is the first guy. He's the main designer of the game. And Space War, again, it looks like something you look at it right away, you think video game, right?
Yeah.
And
No, 100%.
yeah, and it was maybe the first game, well, that sort of, it got popular and it got spread around, right? At the
Right.
time, I think there was probably a prototypical internet between all these universities. So it was the first game that kind of got spread around, and like everyone wanted to play it. And they ended up at computer labs. They would ban Space War because everyone would just go in and be playing games all night. And they look at the usage of the computer and they go, "What the hell? What is this thing eating up like 96% of the computer cycles?" I was like, everyone's playing Space War.
Yeah, that is absolutely crazy, and it's really interesting, these intricate connections between, the early games, and the some of the world's most brilliant minds actually started the whole video game industry, you could say, right?
It's just like David Crane said, right? You have computers, and what are people going to do with computers? They're going to make games,
right?
Because what have we been doing that for as long as humans have been around? We've been making games.
Next, I want to talk about, we mentioned Nolan Bushnell before. I want to talk exactly about him. How important of a figure do you think Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari and the creator of, PONG, is in the landscape of the video game industry? Obviously, I read his incredible story on your website, which, I really can quite confidently be an amazing Hollywood movie, if you ask me. Could you dive into that a little bit and talk about, his importance and his impact on the industry? Because I believe it is probably one of the most crucial. He is probably one of the most crucial people in the industry. Correct?
He is. What's interesting is Bushnell created Pong, but he based his design of Pong on work that had been done by Ralph Baer before him. Right, Ralph Baer had developed this home video game system where it's one aspect of it is Pong, and you could play some other games on it too. But he invented this early system that was sold to Magnavox, and then they produced it as the Odyssey, which is pretty much the first home video game system sold in 1971.
I think we ought to move right on now to the first of our three scenarios, the TV gaming. Here's my partner Bill, and we're going to play ping pong for you in a minute. Here we go. A 1, a 2, a 3, and down I go. And up I go, and down I go. Now watch me fake them up. I didn't do it. I did it this time. Okay. Whoops. 1, 2, 1.
And so Bushnell had seen that as a display, and then he went and made Pong, which is almost the same game, created in a different way. But so you can't say that Nolan Bushnell is the inventor of the video game, but you can say by all means that Nolan Bushnell is the inventor of the video game industry. Right? Because what he made Pong, and Pong just took off. All of a sudden, it totally set the field for video games. Right, and how it, the system that Magnavox sold didn't catch the world on fire, but Pong definitely did. It like I said, Atari made a tiny little sliver of all the amount of games. Everyone else has made their own version too, right? And they sold hundreds of thousands of copies. But definitely Bushnell, in one regard, he is the founder of the video game industry, and Bushnell in his heart is a carnival barker, right? He's an evangelist, you would say, right? And he definitely, in his exuberance and his his comments that he's made at the time and then over the years, it's like he is another one of those figures like Trip Hawkins, where they're looking to push the field forward, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. A great quote from Nolan Bushnell is, if you're not failing occasionally, then you're not reaching out as far as you can reach, right?
Okay. Interesting.
Right. So it's like, you can learn from your failures as much as you can learn from your successes. So he's like saying, just you try. And he himself, he founded Atari, the fastest growing business corporation at the time in the world. Something that's still existing today, although it's a different
A bit
entity
different,
than
yeah.
than it
Yeah.
was from his. We can't go into that because that's just read my site. It's a twisty turny Byzantine kind of
Yeah.
story about all the different versions of Atari there've been. But yeah, he not only was he I don't know how much of a good engineer he was, but he started the industry. He was like a great mouthpiece for the industry, and so it's you can't really understate.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You're perfectly right. And I can agree with you that he can get the accolade of, being the person who created the video game industry.
Yeah.
And it's a really important distinction, and definitely, a story that I was fascinated to read. I did not know it, that well. I thought I knew kind of, Atari and what happened there, but
Mhm.
I was far from it. And again, thank you for documenting it so meticulously and
Yeah,
in
not a
such an
problem.
interesting way on your website.
Thanks.
My next interest would be, I'd like to talk about the story of the creation of the video game console as we know it today. Right, the story involves who are known as probably the fathers of video games, from what I've read, who are Jerry A. Lawson, who's the creator of the Channel F, which is the
Yeah.
first console that used cartridges,
Yeah.
right? From what I
Yeah.
understand, and Wallace Krishner and Lawrence Haskell, the duo that actually created the cartridge itself, which was probably the pivotal creation for video game consoles. Because prior to that, again, from what I've noticed on your website, is that video game consoles worked on basically pre-installed information that was generated on screen and created gameplay. So could you talk about that story a little bit, of the creation of what we know today as a video game console where we can choose and play whatever we want?
Yeah. Well, like I said, Ralph Baer created he called the brown box prototype, which was sold to Magnavox, and they made the Odyssey, which was the first home video game console. Like you
Right,
said, hardwired, and like you put little cards in the Odyssey, but didn't contain RAM information, right? It wasn't information that was moved into the computer and then it processed it and then outputted whatever. It's like all it did was it's just kind of changed the switches inside and like made different types of graphics appear on the screen. But with the Channel F, it's just amazing to me. Again, this is like, imagine like a time when video game cartridges were like the latest thing.
yeah,
Right,
that's
like how
right
much of
to
a sea change that is. Like instead
yeah.
of just you're stuck with, and again they did home Pong versions, and Pong would be like you could play back and forth, or you could play squash where you're playing by yourself, just batting the dot against the wall and coming back. And you could
Right,
play hockey where you had two paddles each side, and it changed a little bit, but it was all hardwired. It was all the stuff that was already inside the circuitry. But all of a sudden,
right.
go to the store, buy a cartridge, you get a whole new game.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean,
That
today
was a
it's
game
absolutely
changing,
normal,
literally
right?
a game changing thing,
Yeah.
right? So it's just amazing to me that to think like just the sea change that was going on, and like you said, Jerry Lawson, he invented the system called the Channel F, but the idea of loading RAM into a cartridge and having that RAM transferred into the RAM of the console was something copyrighted by a different company, and they licensed that technology in order to use it.
Right, right. At the time when this was created, did all the companies that created consoles just go nuts and start to either copy or perhaps contact, the original creators of the cartridge to then also license it for themselves? Or
Yeah, I think some companies license the technology. A lot of the times what will happen is a company will reverse engineer the tech, right? They
right,
take
yeah,
people that are ensconced by themselves, so they have they're not getting any information about how it's done. They look at the circuitry and they reverse engineer to get to the
right,
result. And then so they've
right,
used a different process to get that same result. So they're able to now use that tech, right? but that
Oh
takes a
man.
lot of
Well,
time, and you need really smart people that are able to take it apart and see how it works, and then
yeah.
reformulate it into something that's not going to be an infringement on somebody's copyright or patent.
Right.
So
Speaking to the
yeah,
patents, was there? I was reading the story on your website. I think there was a problem with a patent. I think someone either didn't do it, or
yeah.
it was
Well,
infringed. Yeah.
the reason why all of a sudden all these other people came out of the woodwork with Pong games is that Atari was really slow at patenting their chips,
Okay. Got it.
right?
Got it. Got it.
So that's how that all happened. But it's a good thing, I think Bushnell himself had an interesting attitude, and it's an attitude now I wish more people would take, where it's like the amount of people copying his work was kind of a sign to him that he was on the right track.
Of
It wasn't
course. Yeah.
something that you got really, of course I'm not a businessman. I don't know how much money, there's a certain amount of money you're losing because other people are making the same kind of thing, but it's also creating a market on which you can now operate more fully because
Right.
it's a bigger market, right?
Right.
And right now, it's like, it's interesting to me all through the history of the site is how much copyright has changed,
Mm-hmm.
right? It used to be that when I started the website, if there was any little bit of IP appropriation, the companies would just come down on you really hard, right? The lawyers would send
Okay.
you, they send you notices, But what
Cease
happened
and
was,
desist.
yeah, exactly, cease and desist. But what
Yeah.
happened was, I call it the Minecraft effect, right? Because Minecraft became the most popular video game of all time, right? And how did it do that? It's because people would play Minecraft, they'd record their gameplay, they post it to YouTube, and just give Minecraft priceless promotion, right? It's
Absolutely.
priceless how much everyone playing their game and having fun. That's priceless promotion for Minecraft, and that's how it got to be so popular. So it became a sea change where companies were all of a sudden, it's great to have people putting our work up on the YouTube or whatever, because it's just priceless promotion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Word of mouth is the best promotion you
Word
could
of
ask
mouth,
for.
right?
Yeah.
So now
Yeah. Yeah.
companies give people the tools. Here, you go and make your videos, put it on YouTube, and we'll
Yeah.
profit from it, because it's exposure to people, and it's
Understood.
amazing how much that's changed, right?
Yeah, that behavior truly, it's a bit contradictory, right? If you create something that is so brand new and that is, industry creating, as we mentioned
Hmm.
before, but then you actually let people have it,
Yeah,
in a way at a loss, because obviously, as you said, we don't know how much money he lost in
right,
this whole
right.
story. But at the end of the day, he created an opportunity for everybody to create their own,
Yeah,
to be creative and to create their own versions of it. Yeah,
that's
which
right.
is, it's a bittersweet story, but I think with a great ending at the end.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Next, I would like to touch upon a little bit upon gaming culture, namely games on film. You have a section dedicated to that on your website, also that is very interesting. And the concept itself is of creating movies of from video games is
Hmm.
nothing really new. However, these days we're seeing more and more video game adaptations, come to life in film.
Yeah.
um, we've seen Tetris, Gran Turismo, The Last of Us TV show,
Yeah.
now Fallout.
I
I,
was
I
gonna
still
say
need to
more
watch that
most
one.
recently Fallout, the very recent
Yeah,
one.
yeah, I
Yeah.
still need to watch that one. I'm so excited to watch that.
Yeah.
I'm very happy with what's happening, really.
Yeah.
Um, what are your thoughts on that and on non-gamers being able to experience stories from games, but now on the big screen? And I say this because if we take an example of The Last of Us, for example, my father didn't play the game, but he watched the TV series and he enjoyed it. So in a way, we have a connection there, and we can talk about this experience together. So what are your thoughts on that?
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think on the whole, when you balance, when you look at video game, movie and TV show adaptations as a whole, like, I think there's more failures than there are successes,
That's true.
right?
Yeah.
And but so on one side, I'd say like it kind of proves that people who are really interested in video games would be your market. We're going to make a movie based on a video game, so our market are the people that like video games. But the problem is they're two totally separate mediums, like we've touched on previously in this discussion,
Yeah.
right? Where
Yeah.
where I think the reason why these game adaptations on the whole are kind of are failures, because it's a failure in the concept. Because if someone's interested in video games, wouldn't they just rather be playing a video game than watching a movie?
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, I'd rather just play it. But if they're able to make something good on its own, then it's what you're talking about, where people who are not uh, avid video game players will
Yeah,
enjoy
exactly.
the media that they're presented with it, like a TV show or a movie. Well, that's really hard to do because, like we've said, playing games is a totally different kind of experience. It's like the interaction, the insertion of someone's agency into what happens in the game, especially something like Fallout. We've mentioned GTA early, and Fallout's the same sort of thing. It's just open world game where you're just thrown
Yeah.
in. You come out of the vault and you've got this post-apocalyptic world. What do you do
Yeah.
with it? Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so if they take stories like and tell a good story with new characters in that world, I think that's a good idea, right?
Right.
But if they like just take the face value of the game and say, hey, let's make a movie out of it, then you almost got to make something new. It's like you'll see adaptations of books going to movies, right? And I always use the example of Stephen King because I'm a huge Stephen King fan.
Yeah.
All of his early books, I don't really follow him anymore. I'm not that interested in the stuff he's writing more recently, but his early stuff is amazing. And they took almost all of those books, made them into films. And again, just like we're talking about, the video game industry has more failures than successes. When it comes to Stephen King adaptations, there's way more failures than successes. And
Right.
the biggest problem with that is Stephen King himself, because whenever he writes a screenplay, it never works. It's always an inferior product, even though the guy himself who wrote the book is writing the screenplay. And that's because when you make a movie out of a book, you need to translate the book into the language of film. And those are two
Right.
totally different things. And it's just
Right.
like if you're a video game developer and you're trying to make a movie based on it, again, there's two totally different things. So you need to translate the video game imagery and characters and situations, and you need to translate that into the language of film, right? So if
Absolutely.
you get somebody really
Absolutely.
good at it, someone really enthusiastic, someone who doesn't lose sight of the material but knows they're making something new and makes it familiar to us, then you're going to have a success.
Understood. Yeah, that makes perfect sense what you're saying. Um, and just to bring a quick example from my side. So I was playing The Last of Us, and then my
Hmm.
dad came in and he kind of saw the game, and he got a little bit interested.
Yeah.
So that was like, well, let's play it together. He's like, no, 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 I'm busy and whatnot. And then, I played the game a few times, and then eventually I was like, you know what, Dad, just sit down with me,
Hmm.
just watch me play this game as a movie.
Right.
And he was reluctant. He's like, I'm not gonna like this. I said, you know what, just sit down with me. So we sit down the first day. We play, I don't know, we start playing at probably at 7 or 8 in the evening. We play
Hmm.
until like 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
He couldn't, stop. And he was like, let's continue, let's continue. I'm like, I want to go sleep.
Yeah.
And we finished the game with him like in maybe 2 or 3 days, right? And he just liked looking at me playing the game,
Yeah.
not because of the gameplay, but because of what was
Yeah.
going on in the
Yeah.
story. So that then translated into the TV series.
Yeah.
And so just to kind of bring more attention to your point about the fact that non-gamers get to experience these games,
Hmm.
that's the interesting part, and I agree with you with that, because that's
Yeah.
exactly what happened to me. He watched the series, he loved it, and
Yeah.
now we can bond with the thing, with
Yeah.
the story.
You know what's
And
really interesting,
very,
Gotcha,
yeah.
is I can map your experience right onto my own life, because I remember when I was younger, I'd play. Um, the Sierra graphic adventures, right? And I have a
Hmm.
huge section on my site about Sierra because Sierra itself is a really super fascinating company run by really interesting people and has a really interesting story. And a story again, like everything that you look over a long haul, it changes quite a bit from where it starts to where it ends. But I remember I'd be at home and I'd be playing a Sierra game. I remember I was playing the Police Quest series made by Sierra, and I was playing it. My mom was watching me, and she was fascinated. She'd sit there and watch me play it and then she'd recommend, "Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you try this? Why don't you
Right,
look under the
right.
rug? Why don't you look over here?" Right, and look in all these places. If you're stuck here, try this, try that. And she still talks about these great times we had when I was playing the Sierra
Yeah.
games, and she was watching me.
And you know what? I can also add a little bit, if I may. When I was younger, my dad was playing, Resident Evil and Silent Hill. Like
Hmm.
he liked those types of.
Yeah,
I'm speaking
he
Resident
liked
Evil
those horror
One, and
games.
he loved those. Yeah, because there's less shooting and more exploring.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was actually watching him playing the game because I
right.
was too scared to play. I didn't really know what to do, so I watched it as a movie. And then how times have changed. Now he
Yeah,
watches me play
yeah,
sometimes
exactly. And
because he.
the Last of Us is a great example because such a cinematic game. It's one of those
Yeah,
games where it's
yeah,
super cinematic. Just like you said, Resident Evil, sort of the same way, quite different, kind of different type of game, but still
yeah.
super cinematic. Like you
Absolutely.
are it's just like you're a movie and then you can influence it. Like it literally is like
Absolutely.
that, right?
And also back in the day, with if we're talking about Resident Evil, those static camera angles, they were just so cinematic, and
Yeah.
because the movement of the character was rendered differently than the backgrounds. The backgrounds looked really 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 like crisp. So back in the day, it really felt like a movie you're playing. So for
Yeah.
me, it was so nice to watch it, and now to see the difference with me playing and him watching, rarely but every once in a while, that's
Right, right.
it's definitely a great experience. William, throughout your journey of documenting the history of video games, what are some of the key observations that you've made regarding the cultural and the technological or even the social shifts that have influenced the gaming landscape throughout the years from when you began to today?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I remember like just an example of the change, the sea change that's kind of gone on. Where I remember when Mortal Kombat was a really popular game, and like the Nintendo did a version. Maybe it was for the N64, maybe it was for the SNES, but they came out with their version and they replaced all the blood with sweat.
Okay. Yeah,
I
I know
don't
what
know
you're
if you
talking about.
remember. I don't know if you remember that, but it's like
I've
they
seen the
removed
YouTube
all the
videos of
blood,
that.
right? And it's just
Yeah,
like,
it was just like white
yeah, it
particles
was like
instead of
white
red. Yeah,
drops instead of red,
yeah,
right? And it's like that
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
really, people were incensed, gamers were incensed. You're changing it so much, right? You're changing what it means, and then you just fast forward all the way to like what we're playing nowadays, right? Like GTA, I keep using that as an example, right? It's super violent. It used to be, they try to ignore that, but now it's a part of it, and we've accepted
Yeah.
that, that's that part of video
Many
games is
lawsuits later.
yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of violence. But so, like I said, video games just reflect our changing mores, right? It's like what is considered unacceptable at one point is now acceptable, and it's just how we change as a species, what we, put
Yeah,
more importance on.
yeah,
There's way more
absolutely.
problems in the world, especially right now, gotcha, than it is
Yeah,
maybe our video games are violent, right? How about the real violence?
yeah,
Not to make this political or anything, but it's
yeah,
like, it's video games are a way for us to express ourselves, and if it's in that shape, then I feel it's okay, right? And then, it lets us sort of work out some issues, work out some problems, relieve some stress, and then maybe we're better people because of it.
I want to look ahead a little bit, and what are your thoughts on the future of video games and the broader video game industry in general? How do
Right.
you envision the video game industry or the landscape itself over the next 50, let's say, or 100 years?
Right. Well, it's interesting because my son is really into VR, and he
Okay.
got the original Oculus back when it was still the Oculus. And just
Yeah.
recently, this Christmas, he got a Meta Quest 3, I guess.
Yeah.
the newest version of it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to play that because it is the future, right? VR and with the Meta 3, it's AR as well, right? So you put on the screen, you put on the headset, and then you're looking at the room you're in, and it adds video game qualities to what you're looking at, right? It actually literally, integrates your surroundings with the game, right? And then there's other parts where you just put on the mask and it's a whole new world. It's a whole different world. Now, I myself can't really play his VR headset too much because I get kind of disoriented. I get a little nauseous, right, if I'm using it too much. But it's still like, it's a whole other aspect. Like, it's always been from Pong. You're playing tennis, right? And then put
Yeah.
on the VR unit in 2024 and you're playing tennis, right? The
Yeah.
only thing you're not
Yeah.
doing is holding a physical racket.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
that, you know, it's always a rush. It's always a rush to immersion. And with VR, it's the ultimate. As far as we've gotten, it's the ultimate, right? I always think the ultimate goal is the holodeck, right, from Star
Okay.
Trek, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're a Star Trek
Yeah.
fan, but like with
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, of course.
the next generation, right? It's the holodeck. You go into a room and it creates this whole room, and like, you know, it's creating a world for you, right? That's the ultimate. I always think the ultimate version is going to be the holodeck, and the VR set is
Wow.
a big step towards that. It's even more
Wow.
immersion. You look around. You're not looking at a screen now. You're looking around, and you're in the world. The graphics are not great. It's not super realistic. Some of them are, but it's you're still lacking. You still know you're putting a screen on your head. Soon it'll be you can't even notice that, right?
Like Ready Player One.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You just go into the Oasis, and
Yeah.
it's a whole world, right? That's
Yeah.
that's the future of video games. And when you put on a VR headset, you're one step closer to that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. I hope to see the day where something like a holodeck becomes a reality,
Yeah.
to experience that. I agree. I do agree with you. I think that,
But you got to be careful, because even in Star Trek, they had warnings. Like, I always think of Lieutenant Barclay, who was a character where he had a hollow addiction,
oh,
right?
okay.
He would go into the holodeck and he make this world, and he made characters out of the people he worked with, and he worked out his frustrations. Like, if his boss was like mean to him, he made him like a small guy in the VR, and he could like boss him around, right? Again, it's
Oh,
cathartic.
wow.
It's
The
cathartic, but
possibilities are
there's an
endless,
issue,
huh?
and even it dealt with the issue where there's a possibility of us relying too much on that, going too much into the fantasy world, and losing our focus of reality, right? Losing a grip
Yeah,
on reality, pretty much.
definitely. I would agree. There's that aspect. Let's hope it doesn't get to that
Yeah,
by the time
exactly.
the technology gets there. William, I run an ongoing section on the podcast where my previous guest leaves a question for my current guest. So my previous guest asks,
How important do you think is voice acting in video games, and how different would the video game industry be if voice acting from games disappeared entirely?
I think it's super important. Like,
right?
again, I will use GTA. I play other games other than GTA. It sounds like that's all I play, right? But it's always been a fascinating series to me. And the thing I love, here's what I love to do most in GTA. And I don't know what it says about me, right? But I'll, like you said, I won't play. I've done all the missions, right? GTA Online, I'll play, and you do missions and, like, stuff like that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But what I do mostly is I'll go to a busy intersection in the city, right? And there's stoplights and the cars are all stopping. What I'll do is I'll pull out my machine gun.
Right.
I won't even fire it. I'll just point it at people, and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
way they freak out always fascinates me, right? Because what I can't say any of the things they say on your podcast, but it's like
Right.
people are screaming and yelling, and they're
We all
swearing
know.
at me, and they say
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And there's different types of voices. You hear ladies and guys, and like older people and younger people, and just their reaction to what I'm doing in the world. It makes me laugh. It's interesting to me, and that's all the voice actors, right? Just saying different things, and they're not. It's not like in The Last of Us where it's very cinematic and they're doing speeches and stuff like that. But it's like just the variety of their reactions is really interesting to me, and that's all voice actors, right? And it's funny, I play as on the opposite spectrum, I play the Division 2 with a group of people, right? Ubisoft's Division 2. And the problem with
Yeah, yeah.
Division 2 is they create a great world, a post-apocalyptic world after this plague. And the problem is the voice acting in that is terrible. I would have to say that Ubisoft. I'm not going to say that. I was going to say Ubisoft generally, their voice acting is not good, but I can't say that. But definitely in the Division, it's not very professional. It kind of sounds like they took the secretaries from their office or whatever, right? Co-workers. So here, be this role in this film,
They run
right?
a budget.
In this game, right? To save some money on the budget, and it sounds terrible sometimes, and it takes me out of it sometimes. Right? The lines are read so terribly and so flat. So it is super important, voiceover acting. Like it's incredibly important to create a world, right? The more I play video games or watch movies or whatever, watch TV shows, the more I'm sort of fascinated in the world building, right?
Right.
And
Absolutely.
as
Absolutely.
part of the world building is the people you come across, and if they don't communicate with you in a sort of cinematic, realistic, or whatever way, then it takes you out of the experience that they're
Right.
trying to create for you in the game. And so, yeah, I'd say
Right.
it's like really important to create that world and your connection with that world through the people that you meet.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can agree. I mean, today, some of the top voice actors are, quite literally Hollywood stars.
Yeah.
They are incredibly famous. They're incredibly talented. Their voices are in many of the top tier, AAA titles, and they have large followings and whatnot, a lot of fans, and so yeah, I think I absolutely agree with you. And in terms of that, voice acting is, a big part of
Yeah, a
of,
great
of video games
example
today.
is one of my favorite games of all time are the Portal games, right?
Right,
And
of
in
course,
the
yeah.
Portal games, you have GLaDOS, this crazy out of control AI, and the lady that does the voice is amazing, right?
I think she's
It's
Ellen
all
McLean.
yeah, that's exactly
Yeah,
right, and she does other
yeah.
stuff too. I think she was also Femme Shep in the Mass Effect games, right? She
Okay,
was the
yeah.
female version of Shepard,
Okay,
and again, a great performance, right? Uh,
absolutely, no, for
and then
sure.
in Portal, like as GLaDOS, like just this deranged, you could,
Yeah,
it's, I can't even describe it, but it's an
yeah, 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 I
amazing
know.
performance, right? An amazing
Yeah,
performance.
no, absolutely. Yeah, it makes the game. It makes
Yeah,
the game.
absolutely. It makes the game, and that's where all the memes come from. And GLaDOS herself is
Yeah,
this memey character, and it's all because of the
yeah,
voice acting. It just makes it
yeah.
so interesting.
William, if I may continue the tradition together with you and ask you to ask a question for my future guest, please.
I would probably ask.
Okay. Okay. That's really interesting. That's really, really cool.
We'll see what people's
Uh,
answers are for that,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. William, a question that I also ask to all of my guests is, what is a video game for you?
Right. What a question. What is a video game? Um,
And what defines a video game for you in
yeah,
your mind?
yeah. What defines a video game? So it's pretty much an interactive story, right? And all the things that a story entails, right? Like a journey, but it's not a journey you're telling me, it's a journey I'm joining you with, and I'm going into your world, and I'm interacting with the world. And whether it's like moving a bat up and down to play Pong or running around in Liberty City or whatever, it's just, it's an interactive experience. It's a story you're telling, and now you've allowed me to become interactive in it, and I can put my own stamp on it, make my own mark.
Right. Right. That's a wonderful answer. And I repeat this to each one of my guests, and I say that there's no wrong answer in this question. And I'm so fascinated to hear the different angles that or different opinions that other people answer this question with. And I agree to all of them. And I'm very thankful that I have the collection of all these opinions about what defines a video game. And yeah, I can absolutely agree with what you're saying. That's a really, really beautiful answer. William, I would like to thank you so very much for joining me today on the podcast. I can't tell you enough about how much I have learned, with all the insight and all the information that you have. I would love to talk to you maybe one more time in a little, in the future, just to kind of dive into the history, sorry, of video games a little bit more.
Mhm.
And I'd like to thank you on behalf of the community for what you're doing, for documenting the history of video games. And I'd like to wish you nothing but the best. I hope that you, as you mentioned on your website, you want to touch some of the modern times with video games and consoles. I hope you get to that, and I
Yeah,
hope you do that successfully. Can't wait to read and all that information and become more knowledgeable. And I just hope that your website continues on and on and on for many generations, so people know where it all started, where it all came from.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much, Gotcha. It was a lot of fun talking with you.